for the poorest communities in the United States head no further than the Native American reservations. Poverty there is rampant. Unsurprisingly, so is crime and drinking. Jeanne Andrews grew up surrounded by this in her community, and it followed her after she left.
My name is Jeanne Andrews. I'm the daughter of Herb Big Crow and Nicolene Crazy Thunder.
Jeanne Andrews is a member of the Oglala Sioux tribe. She grew up on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota.
We are a beautiful group of people. We are unique. We have a culture that is full of color and beauty.
However, she says growing up on the reservation that is plagued by poverty, she experienced darkness and despair early on.
I do think that there is a dominant feeling of hopelessness on the reservation because there's a lot of drugs and alcohol in our community, and there's a lot of violence.
Jeanne was affected by it all. At age 8, she was introduced to sniffing glue. By 12, she had been initiated into a gang, and a year later she was raped by one of its members. She turned to alcohol and drugs to cope with her emotions.
I felt worthless. I felt devalued.
Her drug use and drinking escalated over time. At 18, she graduated, left the reservation, and joined the military, through which she met her husband. Though she was disciplined for drinking and drugs, she received an honorable discharge at 20 and gave birth to her first child. Her husband was overseas on deployment when she was raped again, after a night of partying with friends.
And for the first time ever after I was assaulted, I became brave enough to actually go to the cops. And I told them what had happened, and the cop laughed at me. I felt so broken. And so I went into a downward spiral after that. We got pregnant with our second son shortly after I was raped. I didn't want to be married anymore. I didn't want to be a mom anymore. I didn't care about who I was at that point. I didn't care what happened to me. And so while my husband was away on military duty, I called my mom and I asked her to take my kids for me. I said, I'd rather drink and get drunk.
As she struggled to heal from the trauma of rape, the couple moved to Louisiana, where they worked freelance to repair homes in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. One day, their money was tight when their boss didn't pay them.
I became very desperate because I was hungry. My husband and I had to choose between getting gas that morning or getting food. And with $6.78, you can't get a lot of gas. You can't get a lot of food either for that much money.
While her husband repaired a Christian woman's home, Jeanne sat in the car and cried out to God.
You know, I'm not in a good place. I'm not a good mom. I don't have money. How is this going to work? And so I prayed to God that day for money. And I prayed. I've never prayed like that before in my life. I just prayed. After that prayer, the Christian woman had came home from work and she asked me how come I was crying. So I shared with her where I was that day as feeling bad about being a mom and that we didn't have any money. The Christian woman said, you know what, Jeanne, don't worry about it. I have about $300 that I can give you right now. And so she took me and my husband to go eat and she gave us the money. And I thought God answers prayer.
The next day, Jeanne attended church with the woman. The message she heard gave her newfound hope that her life could change for the better.
There was a man on the stage, and I remember him saying, do you want to quit drinking? Do you want to quit smoking? Because God has a plan. Jesus has a plan for you. God knew how many times I would sit in my bathroom and cry because I didn't want to drink. I didn't want to smoke, but I didn't have the power to quit on my own. I walked into the middle of the aisle and I started to walk forward. I just remember saying, I'm so sorry that I hurt you, God. I am so sorry that I did the things that I did. I am sorry. Will you forgive me? And I felt like there was this big burden lifted off my shoulders. And when I got up, it was gone. You know, I was about to lose my marriage. I lost my kids. I didn't know where I was going. But then I met God. I met Jesus, and He began to restore my life that day. And so I walked out of that church a different woman.
She's been sober ever since.
I went to a friend's house where they were waiting for me to get high with them. And I remember telling them I don't need weed anymore. I got Jesus.
She began attending church and learned how to read the Bible.
He gave me the right people to cope with my sexual assault. I did get help. I seek counseling where needed. And he makes me whole. He's making me whole.
Today, she finds joy in being a loving wife and dedicated mother to her 3 sons, Elijah, Neil, and Malachi.
That is my biggest ministry, is being able to walk with my boys and my husband and saying, look at what God has done for our family, because I am a first-generation Christian in my immediate family. He changes lives, and he doesn't just change my life, but he changes families.
Jeanne's passion is inspiring and mentoring women, especially those who live on reservations. She speaks to people around the country and shares her story of healing, hope, and salvation.
And I started to serve my people. I started to share with them the love that I felt with Christ, and how the hopelessness that I once had was no longer there, and that they could too feel that they didn't have to live the way that, in hopelessness, but that there was hope out there, and his name is Jesus.
Maybe you're in the same place that Jenny was in, where she said, I didn't want to smoke, I didn't want to drink, I didn't want to do drugs. I just didn't know, I didn't have the power to stop doing all of that. So how did she stop doing that? Well, first of all, she recognized that what she was doing was an affront to a God who loved her, who created her with a plan and a purpose in mind, who knew her, watched over her, but gave her the freedom to choose whether she would follow him or follow her own way. And once she understood that, she got up out of her seat, walked down the center aisle of a church, saying what we all need to say: God, I am so sorry for hurting you the way that I have. Please forgive me. Sometimes we think that the choice is, can God do a good thing for us, or should we just keep doing what we're doing? We are offending the one who created us by our behavior. We're offending him by the choices we make, by the things that happen inside of us that keep us from being good husbands, wives, moms, dads, citizens, neighbors. You see, you can't make those selfish choices very long before it starts to impact every area of your life. And how sad the heart of God is when he watches that. Why doesn't he intervene? Because he wants us to love us because we love him because we choose to. Not because we're automatons, we're not forced to. He doesn't demand it. He's saying, you choose this day who you'll serve. That's your choice right now. Will you serve the living God? Will you understand who he is, how much he loves you, and that you've been created with a plan and a purpose in mind? Begin right where Jenny began, just saying, God, I'm so sorry. I've wasted time, I've wasted myself, I've wasted my family, I've wasted the gifts and talents and abilities you've given me. Will you forgive me? And you know what he says? I forgive you. I forgive your sins as far as the east is from the west, and will remember them no more. And beyond that, he says, I will come into the midst of your heart, of your soul, of your being, and equip you to live differently, empower you to make different choices. That's what you're saying yes to today. Listen, get back to the one who created you. That's where you're going to find purpose and meaning and even peace from your past, as well as the power and the joy of a new beginning. Just talk to him. That's what prayer is, just talking to God, being honest with him and honest with yourself. If you have things that you'd like to pray about with someone else today, our number's toll-free. Listen, there's a friend on the other end of the line who's already prayed the prayer we're talking about, already had that conversation, already surrendered their lives to God, and they're on the phone today because they're waiting for your phone call. So feel free to call.
More than half of this country's land is desert, and we have a severe water shortage. Moses led us to Israel, a country that has no oil, no water, not too good soil, and we had to make the best out of it.
Thousands of years ago, Moses had to strike a rock to get water in the desert. Well, today Israelis are taking a slightly different approach, using technology and creativity. In Israel, the main sources of drinking water are the Sea of Galilee and 2 underground aquifers. If rainfall is short, so is the nation's water supply. In 1953, Israel started building the National Water Carrier, a system of pipelines, canals, and reservoirs that carry water from the Sea of Galilee to the rest of Israel.
So we didn't have water? Okay, we developed water technology. One of the things that Israel has excelled in is taking what some people would see as risk factors or as curses and turning them into blessings. From the time of Bilam, the Jewish people have always been able to somehow turn the curse into a blessing.
The pipelines were a good start, but Israel's fresh water supply wasn't enough to support a growing country. So Israelis started looking west to the Mediterranean. For thousands of years, the Mediterranean Sea was the center of the ancient world, the crossroads between Europe, Asia, and Africa. And now it's one of Israel's greatest natural resources.
Israel is desalinating so much of its drinking water, the majority of our drinking water's origin will be the Mediterranean Sea by the end of next year.
Today, Israel produces 450 million cubic meters of drinkable water a day. Through a process called seawater reverse osmosis, water can go from the ocean to the faucet in less than 90 minutes. The Israeli technology is now used in more than 40 countries around the world. And thanks to the Mediterranean, Israel may soon have something that was once unthinkable: a water surplus.
In this country, we don't have much water, except somehow, by the end of this decade, Israel is going to become a net water exporter. Just on today's news, there was an item about how Israel is stepping up the export of water to Jordan in order to supply water for all the Syrian refugees who are fleeing into Jordan.
While Israel produces drinking water from the sea, many farmers are getting water for their crops literally out of thin air. Ancient Israelites used stones to collect the dew every morning. Now an Israeli company is using plastic trays to do the same. The trays were developed by Talyad Technologies, which means God's dew in Hebrew. Every morning, these trays channel the dew straight into the roots of the plants. They also prevent weeds from growing between the plants and reduce water usage by up to 50%. Israeli farmers have always made good use of their water, but it wasn't long before they realized that in order to survive, they also needed to start reusing it.
Today, Israel recycles 80% of its wastewater. The closest competitor is Spain with 10%. So we recycle more than 8 times more water than any other country on the planet.
Israelis developed a way to purify wastewater using ultraviolet light. This treated water is then used to irrigate crops.
If you use it for vegetables, then you would like to clean it to the extent that you can almost drink it. So it is treated to a very high degree. Today, 60% of the water that is irrigating fields in Israel is produced water and not natural water. And I'll give you an example of our farm here on the kibbutz. We grow jojoba, and we use only sewage water, only treated wastewater to irrigate our jojoba. And this is done all over Israel.
Israel may be short on fresh water, but the country's Negev desert is sitting on an underground ocean, too salty to drink or desalinate. So Israeli settlers found a new way to use it.
You cannot really fight nature. Nature will fight you back. We found out after the years that it's better to cooperate and to coordinate with what you've got.
Yoav Dagan is one of a growing number of Israelis who have left the ocean to go fishing in the desert. They build fish farms using the warm, salty water from underground. It's ideal for raising saltwater fish like tilapia, sea bass, and barramundi.
The place here is working without chemicals, without anything. It's very healthy, it's friendly for the environment, and it's good for us in a matter of the pocket. We are making good money, and this is the bottom line.
At this kibbutz in the Negev desert, even the fish waste is put to use. Every week, the water in these tanks is replaced and pumped underground to irrigate the nearby olive grove. The fish waste in the water makes an ideal natural fertilizer.
As you can see on the side, the olives are growing around the farm, around the fish, and are doing very well without any other chemicals, only by the nutrients of the fish.
Israel has taken this idea to other countries struggling with water and food shortages.
We're taking African villages, teaching them how to essentially build fish farms. If you look at around Lake Victoria, the Nile perch were dying, and Israelis are now going in to teach the farmers how to grow them in ponds so that you can actually continue to eat the Nile perch.
Over the years, Israelis also found new ways to use less water. And as always, they started in the desert.
There's the story of the Arava. Sometimes as 20 millimeters of rain annual fall, very harsh climate, and still, thanks to drip irrigation, this became the vegetable barn of Israel. 65% of vegetable export out of Israel, mainly to Europe, is coming from the Arava.
Today, even the driest parts of the desert are blooming, with help from a process called drip irrigation. The idea is older than the state of Israel itself.
When the first settlers came here, young people came from the city and they wanted to be farmers. And they came to Kibbutz Hatzerim and they faced many challenges. Arid land, high salinity, not enough water. And there was even a time when they considered moving to another place. But then Ben-Gurion came, who was a leader with a real vision, and he said, guys, if you want to move, it's okay, but further south, not back to the north. And we stayed here and we continued and we did some experiments, but still we were struggling. Then we met the guy who invented drip irrigation.
That guy was an engineer named Simcha Blas. He got the idea for drip irrigation after seeing a tree that was larger than the others around it. After digging around the roots, he found it was being watered by a leak in an underground pipe.
So this gave him the idea, but it took him some years, actually until plastic was introduced, to start and make experiments with drippers that will emit water in small drops. And this is basically drip irrigation.
Blas met the farmers of Kibbutz Hatzerim, and together they started a company called Netafim, which means drops of water in Hebrew. Soon they boosted their crop yield by 50% and used 40% less water to do it.
Drip irrigation saves a lot of water. Producing more, getting more, yet not harming the environment.
For almost half a century, the company has lived up to its slogan, grow more with less, not just in Israel, but in 110 countries around the world, from sugarcane fields in the Philippines to tea plantations in Tanzania.
You know, India is now our #1 country. The results, looking at the yield increase, were amazing. 50% of the farmers got an increase in yield between 25 and 50%. Another 25% of the farmers got an increase in yield of up to 75%.
9.5 even designed a system that works solely on gravity for places like Peru, where remote mountain farmers don't have electricity.
The plant doesn't know the difference. The plant doesn't know that you don't have a $20,000 computer behind the dripper. And it works beautifully. Everyone is talking about water scarcity. 70% of the water that we have available in the world is used for agriculture. Now, if we save only 15% in agriculture, we can more than double the available water for drinking and sanitation. In Hebrew, we have a term which is called tikkun olam, which is fixing the world. And this is basically what drip irrigation does. This is my personal goal and challenge.
Martin Luther King was just 39 years old when he died. During his short life, he worked to end America's long history of injustice. How did he do it? Well, according to his niece, by following the rules.
Alveda King has seen her share of tragedies, from the assassination of her uncle Martin Luther King Jr. to the untimely death of her father. But she's also witnessed great triumph, such as the passing of the Civil Rights Act. Through all of life's trials and victories, Alveda and her family learned timeless truths that enabled them to bring about revolutionary change. In her new book, King Rules, Alveda shares those core values that guided the King family that will help you, your family, and our nation to prosper.
Alveda King is here with us now, and we welcome you back to the 700
Hello, Terry.
Club.
It's so good to be here.
It's a great treat to see you again.
Thank you.
I want to talk a little bit about, well, your book is called King Rules, but the rules that Martin lived by really were not just his. They were from a long line of king rules. Talk about that.
Absolutely. And you'll see in our family tree 7 generations.
That family tree I looked at and went, oh my goodness, I've never seen a tree this big.
Isn't it amazing? Well, it's at kingrulesbook.com. Nelson Books has put so many pictures there. And we wanted you to know that Martin Luther King Jr. was not born in a vacuum. He came from generations of godly people, imperfect people who served a perfect God.
Yes, yes. You talk about one of the first rules that you say is to make home a priority. And I thought, boy, as the world gets faster and faster and faster, you know, we sometimes get our priorities out of order, but that's a significant one, and it's been significant for your family. Talk about that.
Well, the importance of home, I remember it from being a little girl, and I remember the birth home where Martin Luther King Jr. was born, my daddy A.D. King and Christine, their sister, and there were so many rules at home, and I know that the audience would love to hear this. At home, Daddy, after Jesus, was king. The father was the head of the household. And then there was Mama King and the children, and they obeyed rules. Now, this is a real funny story, but it's true. Daddy King, they would hold dinner until he came home, if he was in town. And when he got there, everybody had to do a Bible verse. Wow. Now, the boys may be hungry because they were waiting for Daddy to get home, so they would say, Jesus wept. And then Daddy King would say, that isn't the Bible, it's the shortest verse, why did he weep? And then it made dinner longer because they had to have a Bible lesson before dinner.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, yeah.
You also say one of the other rules that you have is work for peace. Not a surprise to people because I think that's Martin's legacy, really, is that we should all be working for peace. But talk a little bit about the things you share regarding that.
Well, you'll notice in the book that there are scriptures to support all of those positions. And so we were looking for the peace that passes all understanding, the peace that Jesus leaves, the peace that causes men and women, no matter what their ethnic group is or economic status is, to love each other. And we believe, and it's a king rule, if you love and regard your fellow human being, then there will be peace because you will respond even to wrongs with love. And that's really where you get peace.
Yeah, the even to wrongs is huge, isn't it?
It is so very huge. And in the 20th century, of course, we were still dealing with skin color and racism. And there are so many issues now for all people from conception until natural death. And people say, well, here she goes with pro-life. No, the baby in the womb, of course. But once the baby is born and becomes a teenager and an adult and then a mature person and an old person. Now, I'm 64 now, and I've always said never mistreat old people. But now that I'm 64,
it's getting more important, isn't it?
Mistreat old people.
It's getting more important to me, too.
Yeah.
But I want you to talk about life. The last time you and I were together, we were at a local gathering here that was all about life. And one of the rules is defend life. I know that you are pro-life. You say that, Dr. King was pro-life, even though he once received an award from Planned Parenthood. But there was a strong belief there in the value of life.
Well, Daddy King, my granddaddy, Martin A.D.'s and Christine's daddy, my mother wanted to have a procedure to not have me in 1950. Abortion was illegal, but you could just go to the doctor and say, my stomach hurts, and he could explore. And then you'd come away with everything that was there, not there. And he says, Nene, you can't abort that baby. She's a little girl with bright skin and bright red hair. I saw her in a dream 3 years ago. Prophetically, no ultrasound. He saw me 3 years before I was born. And then in the 70s, I thought about aborting another child, and I told Granddaddy. He says, no, that's my great-grandchild. That's not a lump of flesh, no. So life is important in our family, and so we defend all life, but really, not just the babies, the hungry. And there's a book about the needy. You defend and stand up for everybody.
Yeah. What was it in your own life that changed things for you? You went through struggles yourself, and even coming up to a place where you were considering an abortion at a point of need in your life. Was it the family rules that finally brought you down the road to a tight relationship with God?
It was the family rules that brought me back. The word of my grandfather. In 1983, I accepted Jesus as my Lord, not Granddaddy's God, not Daddy's God, but my God, Jesus as my Savior. And in 1983, my life changed. And finally, I ended up as African American Director of African American Outreach with Priest for Life many years later.
Wow. When you were writing this book, I'm sure, first of all, it brought back many memories, but I'm sure it also caused you to think a great deal about our culture today. What do you want people to take away from this?
Well, I want to say it's so important that that's a Thomas Nelson book, the history of how many Bibles Thomas Nelson got into the hands of people. That meant a lot, that a Bible company would take the king rules, and there's a scripture, may the king's rule be as refreshing as the rain. It's in the beginning of the book. I'm not talking about the human king family, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And so to just know that no matter what we're doing in life, we all are imperfect without Christ. There are 10 rules that can help us to get back to God.
Yeah. And you will enjoy reading about all of them because the rules matter, and so do the stories surrounding them. If you'd like to know more about King Rules, read Alvida's book. This is available in stores nationwide. And Alvida, we thank you for being with us today and for the message you bring.
Thank you
great
so
to see
much.
you again.
It's good to see you
The
too.
Lord bless you. Pat?
Fascinating. Thank you. We leave you today with this power minute from Psalm 145. He will fulfill the desire of those who fear him. He also will hear their cry and save them. The Lord preserves all who love him. Bye-bye.
When you need to talk to someone who cares, the 700 Club has telephone prayer counselors standing by to answer your call. So call or write their offices in your country today.